Good morning to everyone, and I'm very delighted that I'm making my presentation after Alicia and Sarah. In fact, Alicia actually said everything. It's amazing because the depth to which she covered, especially the case in Africa, is quite impressive. One of the things I'll try to do, Africa is very diverse, and also the conflict, they are very diverse. So one of the things is to look at the regional level of the conflict, then we'll zoom into the national level, and then the subnational level, because the nature of those conflicts are very different, and most of them are also driven by climate issues. So the outline of my talk is quite, it looks more, but it's just to structure it so that people can follow. To look at the global setting of this issue, by the IPCC and also by the UN Security Council, because this is a major topic in the UN Security Council. As Christy said, no peacekeeping mission goes without a climate change context. Then we will look at the regional level orientation of climate security in Africa. Then we move to the country, and then particularly South Sudan, because the nature of the conflict in South Sudan will tell you the kind of dynamics at subnational level and the intensity of those kind of issues. We will now look at how will the future climate shape all of these issues, because we know that the science tells us that it will be more intense than what we are experiencing today. Then the disruption is having on livelihoods, because that's where the conflict actually starts. Because when people move, they infringe into the spaces of other people. And as the climate intensifies, people become very territorial. So it becomes very, very intense. And then from a whole kind of enforcement, law enforcement, or to maintain rule of law, that also have a constraint to military. I'm coming from a peacekeeping mission. How do they help to maintain law and order? I mean, climate is also a major issue for them to conduct the operation, and even humanitarian issues. Then the consequences of the displacement, and what is the region doing to respond to some of that. So let's start with the global level of this whole issue. Let me just start with the IPCC, which sets the element of climate change. The key word that I like people to take note is the element of disruption, because conflict comes because there is disruption, right? So people have to struggle. And what they did, the last IPCC report just tried to show schematically how some of that issues happen. When there is heat stress, it moves into other systems. There's kind of the cascading effects of some of these issues, which eventually can extend at a much global level, especially if it's going through food systems, reduced productivity, and other issues at the level of the household. And most of that is just to tell you that we have to have a new understanding of interconnections. Things are highly interconnected, such that when there are some of these issues, you can't only look at them in isolation. Previous speakers have said that you have to look at them more collectively. And that is exactly what the science is saying. In fact, the number of people this report highlighted that will be living in hotspots areas of high vulnerability is increasing. At the time, this was in 2022, it's even increased today. At the time, they were saying about 3.3 to 3.6 billion people who were living in this kind of places. Alicia highly indicated some of those issues already, and every small increase in warming will result in increased risk. We are seeing that a lot in Africa, because most of Africa is in the tropics, where temperature are already very high. So any marginal increase in temperature creates enormous disruption to the life of people. At the level of the Security Council, it's also a major issue. Luckily, most of the students here are lawyers, and I guess if they are following some of the debates at the level of the Security Council, they are highly unanimous with looking at issues of climate change as some of the root causes of conflict. If you ignore it, there's no way you achieve peace, as from what they are saying. And from time to time, Russia and China have tried to veto some kind of universal information on this, not really because they disagree, but they feel that we cannot securize climate change. It's a kind of like securization of climate change. That's their fear. And some of them push back that take it to the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that discusses this issue. But then they don't have the mandate to discuss the security part of it. So the Security Council, one of the things they're doing is to increasingly put this in the mandate of any mission, so that they must be able to look at some of these issues. So let's go now to the next area, which is more of how is it unfolding in Africa. And one of the things there is to look at, as Alicia Riley said, the element of transboundary systems. That's it's like a boiling pot in Africa. Africa has more than 80 transboundary systems, particularly water basins. These are even bigger ones because there are even other ones which are much smaller. And some of these have regulations, they have governance systems put in place, others don't. And the tendency is that it's creating a lot of issues. The transboundary water covers over 64% of the continent. That's enormous to deal with. Particularly land areas, and contain more than 93% of the water resources, surface water resources. So we will imagine that there will be a lot of struggle on that. Alicia mentioned one of the Nile Basin. Ethiopia and Egypt actually were at the brink of war. In fact, the last 2-3 years ago, mainly because Egypt vigorously opposed the construction of the dam. Part of that, again, is because Egypt, the climate change impact, the impact of climate change in Egypt will reduce food productivity by about 30%, which is unacceptable to the Egyptian people. So for them, any slight disturbance with the flow of the Nile means you are actually amplifying their own risk. Now these have shifted the whole dynamics in the region. Egypt has now shifted their attention from the Blue Nile to the White Nile. And they are right here there in Cambodia trying to dredge, as Alicia said, to dredge the Nile, the White Nile, so that there should be more flow to Egypt. They call it cleaning, they're cleaning, but actually it's an issue of dredging. Because one of the things with the Nile is that when the water flows, when it gets to the Sud wetland in South Sudan, it slows down because this is a plain. The water slows down and it could take 1 year to move. The Egyptians said, no, we want to get this thing flow quickly. So they are actually trying to do that, but there's a lot of opposition within the country. That, again, is a very volatile situation that may lead to very major conflict. It's not just surface water, it's also the aquifer. Again, just like Alicia said, you could see you could see the diagram, the kind of transboundary aquifer that also exists in the continent. 42% of the continent and more than 30% of the population, they are living on transboundary aquifer. And the element of groundwater is actually what helps a lot of people to live on. And this, again, will be highly disputed as we go forward with climate change. It's not, again, similarly, we look at the agroecological zones. Most people are beginning to externalize their food production to Africa. And again, it tells you that that's, again, another dynamics that is happening. And we have to keep an eye on it because a lot of these communities cannot monitor, they cannot safeguard some of the issues. They don't have any legal framework that helps them to deal with some of these issues. It's even worse now with the whole element of carbon trade, with the kind of new dynamics that we are seeing with some of these issues. And then, even though there are all of these sub-regional bodies, there is no real governance capabilities to deal with it. They are very weak systems, so they cannot really enforce anything, because the idea of the regional system was to see how do you use regional governance structure to help to manage the risk of those kind of conflict in those places. There's some level of political buy-in, but it's quite fragile, because there's no ability to keep this together going forward. So one of the things we are noticing, particularly in the element of the Sahel, is to show that there are climate hotspots. Those who are familiar with the Sahel knows that it's a global hotspot for climate change. It's globally recognized. Again, it's also a hotspot of conflict. And most of the conflict is linked to pasture for grazing land, where there's lack of water and so on. So the overlap shows you that there is really, really an area that we will always be having recurrent conflict, particularly as the intensity of climate change increases. Just to show you the traffic in terms of transhumance and nomadism. People are moving everywhere. They have even tried to, at times, create transhuman observatory to try to see how you manage some of this. But the nature of climate change makes this very irrelevant, because now people are no more complying with some of this kind of instrument that is being put in place to help. This is, again, a drought-related issue of movement or seasonal pattern of movement. But then when you look the scientific literature on flood, out of 188 countries that was studied in this paper in Nature, I mean, the top 10, where you look at poverty and the exposure to drought in terms of population, they're all African countries. It tells you that there is a major issue there, even with issues like flooding, which we are not really yet talking much about it. Now, let's start going to country-level issues. And that the first one is South Sudan. It's just like a microcosm to see how this issue can move from the national level to the sub-national level. And it creates some kind of new dynamics. From the climate perspective, the temperature in South Sudan has increased, like in most African countries, by 1 to 1.5 degrees from pre-industrial period. Some places have even gone more than that, like in the Sahel. But one of the critical things is that there's large interannual variability in rainfall, sometimes up to 50%. That makes planning very difficult for land-based practices like agriculture, grazing, and all of that stuff. So people are highly disoriented when it comes. And even when there is rainfall, it's erratic, where a huge amount of rainfall can fall in an unpredictable manner. So it even creates a very, it's like a surprise event to people and makes it worse. Then drought is also more frequent in the country. But then when you look at the future climate, the tendency is that more of this will be more severe, and then the recurrent local impact is likely to trigger more and more conflict, as I will show you. For example, if you look at river flood, this is a World Bank just to show the picture. The entire country is affected in a way, and that is classified as high, which is it's not a pleasant thing for a country. Similarly, with urban flooding, it's the same. The element of water scarcity also is quite an issue, as well as wildfire. At the time, we haven't even been talking a lot about heat stress, but this is heat stress. The OCHA, the Office of Humanitarian Affairs, is warning of heat stress. And if that is not enough, we are experiencing heat stress now in South Sudan. This is the projection of last week, the 10 days projection. I mean, school have been closed because it's too hot to send children to school. It tells you that it's really, this is a new phenomena, which was not there as one of those climate factors that will disrupt. We used to talk about floods, we used to talk about drought, but this is becoming another major issue which is the disruption is creating an erratic behavior, especially among pastoralists, causing a lot of problems. So let's move quickly to the part of the destruction and disruption to livelihood of people. One of the things I have to emphasize is that the climate shock in South Sudan is causing a contrasting hydrological situation. You have the flood, as you could see there, and drought. And sometimes back to back in the same location. And also concurrently in the country, as I will show you. So it stretches the government capabilities to respond to the extent that sometimes they just pretend not to see it because it is overwhelming. Similarly, if you look at flooding, we only talk about the impacts. But if that is a pastoralist desperately trying to move the animal to higher grounds, and the tendency is that when he or she succeeds to get the animal on the other side, it becomes an issue of death, because anybody who tries to interfere with what they want to do, you can't stand on their way. They will fight because it's a desperate situation. Similarly, it creates, whether it's flood or drought, it creates complete crop failure, which amplify the dependency on humanitarian support. There's no food for people to eat. This is a case, the human face of some of this tragedy. At one side of the same country, a child doesn't have water to drink. This one came out in the Standard, the one British paper, where this woman dropped off all her assets and tried to rescue the baby in that bucket in South Sudan. These are both in South Sudan. So it creates some very dangerous level of challenges to people. Similarly, natural ecosystems are highly battered by this issue. Because why is this important? Most people, the safety nets are in natural systems. People don't have a lot of backups, like systems to save things, so they depend on the natural systems to preserve, to supplement what they have at the household level. And also, it's not free from flood. Similarly, you could see the housing, even wildlife, they're all escaping because this whole thing is a disruption at a monumental scale. Some of the response measures people try to do is quite haphazard because of desperation. Some places people try to build dikes to deal with it. Others try to build water retention ponds, which again is inconsistent because you need a more proper way to get it done to save people from some of these issues. So then let me go quickly to how does that constrain rule of law? How do you try to enforce that? In the case of, I'm coming from a peacekeeping mission, and the idea is how do we protect civilians under this kind of situation? Let's start with the humanitarian operations. You see how desperately people can go. This is World Food Program trying to move to reach those who are cut off completely. If you look at the health services, it's the same issue. They can't reach some of the places that have been cut off completely by this kind of disaster. Similarly, even conducting regular patrols by the force becomes impossible. The roads, and this is the time that they also get exposed to attacks because they are bogged, right? So it's a risk for them also to conduct what they have to do. They spend a long time to try to carry supplies to some places. I think it was last year, more than 9 trucks were attacked by, some of these guys, and killed a couple of humanitarian people because they are exposed by the weather condition. It is really, really a dangerous exercise. Again, in the military stretch, they instead try to protect themselves or by creating passages, because if you don't have passages, you are actually yourself a victim to some of these issues. Then when we come to the military operation itself, this is the situation. They try to build dikes. They try to do all kind of stuff. This is the force commander trying to mobilize people to do some work to safeguard critical infrastructure. Otherwise, you will see for yourself that it is not a very good terrain for anyone to function. Their own camps get flooded as well, and they have to pump out water to make sure that they survive under the kind of situation. The small airfields there, if you don't do something, there's no way anybody can come in or go out. So it tells you the scale of which climate disruption can ripple into different aspects of what we do. Every activity becomes more of shifting people and resulting to other forms of transportation. And what is the consequences of this discretion, of all of this? Migration. People move. It's only the lifeline that people may have. This is a case that we recorded in South Sudan. More than 83% of the disaster there was linked to climate effects. And these are people moving because they have to move. The question then is that where are the elderly and the sick? They're all left behind because, I mean, it's an issue of survival. So it creates a very massive issue for people. We recorded more than 2 million people internally displaced in South Sudan in 2021, and 55% were women, and sometimes children. So it's a very dire situation that we find ourselves in. And then wildlife also migrate. People may not know, but the biggest mammal population in the world is in South Sudan, even more than the Serengeti antelopes. There are more than 5 million of them in South Sudan, indeed. We are mammal population. But nobody knows about it because we only know the negative part of South Sudan. So it's the potentials are there. I can't even go into how wildlife also falls into the whole climate security in terms of wildlife trade, because that's another emerging issue that is happening in that part of the world. This is how women go and look for firewood. It's a dire situation. Women take all the struggles to go out to look for firewood. And this is where you have conflict-related sexual violence, because they get highly exposed to some of these issues. If I show you the figures, the human rights report figures of some of these incidents, it's just unbelievable. Mainly because they have to cook food. They go to look for either wild water lily to cook, or go out struggling to get firewood, because that's the only source of energy. Again, we were talking yesterday, we have to talk about just energy transition. These are some of the issues which we have to keep in mind, that some people go to all sort of extent to get things done. Now the consequences of this at sub-national level is that there's radicalization of the pastoral practices. Before, people herders used to carry sticks, as you see on the right side. Now they carry guns. That's a massive transformation. It hasn't come accidentally. There's no way you can dissociate that from climate, because the intolerance, like I showed you, the young man trying to move the cattle through water. If he succeeds to get on the other side, and by any means trail into somebody's field, the ability to negotiate, it's absolutely zero. So they end up carrying weapons. So what we end up having now is weaponization of nomadism. It's become a very, very major source of conflict at sub-national level. Because once these people, the only asset they have is their livestock. Even some of the ministers, they are not yet in a modern economy where they put money in banks and so on. So they store their wealth in livestock. And because of that, there is always that tendency to protect their assets. So they have tried as much as possible to put this. So as the climate is shifting and creating the inability to graze where they are. They move their livestock to the south. And when they go to the south, because it's flood displacement, it's not seasonal migration, it becomes a protracted displacement. So because they don't know when the flood will recede for them to go back. The owners of those areas say this is land occupation. You've overstayed. You used to come and stay for 3 months. Now you are here for 6 months, you are not going back. It means that you want to occupy this land. So it becomes now they to pick guns and start fighting. So it's a very, very, very complex situation that we have to pay a lot of attention. And then if you look at it, this is just, we track how is the flood across the country. This is December last year. From the UN has set up the UN satellite system, which we use to track. Sometimes we use NASA to look at this, but to track the coverage of flood events and the number of people affected. If you see this map, this is in December, which is normally supposed to be a dry season in that part of Africa. The extent of flood, those big bubbles, the yellow, it tells you places affected by flood. The El Nino is really also creating a major problem in that part of the world. Normally, we shouldn't have this kind of situation, but this is what is happening. And what results is that people have to move. There's no one who will stay in that kind of situation. And as they move into somebody's land. So the cycle of conflict continues. And even with if you look at it across East Africa, the blue tells you immediately that in 2024, this year we will see how more severity of flood. Even though we are now under heat stress, but flood, this is a NASA NOAA figure, we will be a major problem with flood in that country. And most part of East Africa will be hit by drought as well, which tells you that nobody is exempted from some of these issues that we are talking about. Similarly, we do track the extent of drought. Luckily, this is done by ICPAC. ICPAC is one of the IGAD centers that help us to track this. Most of South Sudan, particularly this side of the country, is affected by drought. What happened is that, like Alicia said in one of, during her talk, some of the people, I went there and you talk to them, when they see that their animals are so frail and about to die, they release them to cross the boundary to Uganda and to Kenya. So we said, why do you do that? They said, they don't want the animal to die. I said, so what do you gain by doing that? He said, after a while we will go and attack and we will raid to rescue some of the animals from those people. So you see the kind of practice that has really been shaped now by climate. So they will raid, and a lot of people do get killed, kidnapped, abduction, and the rest during those kind of raids. It's massive when it happens. And there will be a counter raid because it never goes. It keeps going back and forth, and the conflict never dies easily. And this is how the extent to it it's affecting. And some of that even leads to disease outbreak, which disrupts the whole pattern of migration, right, in the country. People just go everywhere. And even the kind of law enforcement becomes very difficult. This is the one due to flood. And also, when all of this happens, the distance you trek, the World Bank did a good study last year to tell you the distance that people trek to carry water. These are usually women and children. The darker the color, it tells you how further away they go. But in average, the population lives more than 30 minutes round trip walk to water point. This is worse during the dry season. In the rainy season, sometimes the water gets polluted, so it even makes it more dangerous to deal with. And similarly, the struggle between livestock and human for the same water point becomes more and more intensified. These are flashpoints for conflict, that we say. A study was done again just to show you by NUPI, to show you the intersection between the fatalities and the agroecological zone. If you see the big bubbles in the red actually areas of agro-pastoral practices. In other words, where farmers and herders, they live together. So the tendency is that a lot of people get killed because they are fighting over the resources as it is diminishing. So the question then is, how do we manage coexistence? That's where the whole element of some rule of law start coming in to make sure that we manage some of these issues. Traditionally, there is always the tendency of demarcation of livestock routes to reduce this. But then, if you see, this is South Sudan, we have tried to mark out the kind of movement of livestock across as transboundary, the blue ones, within the state and across states. It's a whole traffic by itself. It's a livestock country. So we are really prepared, we are understanding that the tendency of conflict will be very vigorous as the climate issue continues. Because the level of migration, internal and external, is huge. This is a huge traffic. There are more than 90 million cattle in that country, which tells you that where are we going to keep this thing, right? And the people are not ready to even sell them because that's like a stock, their own banking, their traditional banking system. So how do we really make sure that these issues, and when it happens, this is the kind of issue we have with food security. You know, where there is flood, this IPC food security map shows you the high extent of food insecurity in the country. Then the emerging issue now, which is very, very worrying, is that there's early onset of migration because the climate system is shifting. And in a way that even the traditional legal system that was there to manage this cannot cope anymore. They cannot move when they used to move before, and they cannot return when they used to return. So we are observing a whole disruption of traditional institutions that used to try to manage this kind of conflict. So the question is we need a new scientific thinking to help them re-customize or redesign this thing so that it can work a little bit better. And one of the things we noticed that you see the conflict prevalence is such that the dry season is generally considered as a conflict season. So we are always prepared in the dry season that there will be more fighting. Across Africa, it's not just South Sudan. Mainly because, as I said before, people postpone their fight until dry season because the terrain is good for them to fight. You see, so it's really a very, this seasonal issue is also, the security dimension is also a very tricky one. And it's been shown by studies that there's about 21% increase in conflict during the El Nino period because the tendency is that the disruption becomes more intense. And so it results to more and more fighting among people. Let me be quick. Okay, now how do the region want to respond? I go back again to the African level. I mean, at the level of the African Union, and they work closely with the United Nations to have what you call the framework for enhanced partnership for peace and security. And part of that is to create, building on some of the UN Charter, and also try to come up with shared understanding of policies so that they can plan and manage peace operations very well and deal with some of these issues. And also try to promote kind of cooperation among countries and as well as mediation so that some of these issues can be managed in a more structured institutional way. And they come up with key activities that they try to do, but then most of this is not done because they don't even have the resources to do it and the kind of legal system that could help them. And they put some very good expectation, like formulation of climate security solutions and policies, like Sarah Riley said, but this thing, there's no system for enforcement. There's no resources. They are not binding, basically. So member states don't even take it seriously. So there is, they try to see if they can improve coordination, partnership, and collaboration in a way that can help to strengthen the regional role for peace, climate change, and security. But again, as I said, there are key challenges. One of it is the element of rule of law. The ability to enforce some of these issues is very weak. It's not there. For some reason, there is a need to build institutional and human capacity and even make them more functional. The element of finance is very clear. We know that. A lot of government will not prioritize their resources on some of these issues because they have some, or they claim they have other compelling issues. Addressing cross-border and transboundary element is becoming more and more urgent. And the element of having a system that projects and predicts the ability for climate change as early warning is very, very dying for them to do. So thanks a lot, and this is what I had to share with you. Thank you very much.